Get to know the Bears' newest pass rusher, DAYO Odeyingbo. Today, we're going to talk about what Odeyingbo brings to the Chicago Bears defensive line. We're going to compare him to some other pass rushers like Chase Young, check out his production, his potential, previous scouting reports, and more. Let's get right into it. I think when it comes to Odeyingbo, too many people are simply looking at the sack numbers, and I might have been guilty of that too at first glance. But this is a young, athletic pass rusher that is just 25 years old. There are 25-year-old players in this year's NFL draft, and Dio is 25 with 4 years of NFL experience and 16 and a half career sacks. A player's best football is still ahead of him. He played out of position last season and still led the team in pressures. He's very good against the run and brings a wicked spin move to the table. He was top 10 in the NFL in quarterback hits in 2024. So while he didn't quite have the sack production you look for, he did have 42 pressures and 13 quarterback hits. He's 6'6", 286, with 34 plus inch arms and a long wingspan. He can play inside or out on the defensive line, and he's produced wherever he lined up. I found a great scouting report on Odeyingbo from Lance Zerloin coming out of college. Let's go over that quickly and see how it's played out over his career so far. Lance said that Odeyingbo has rare physical traits and an outstanding blend of height, weight, and length. He has positional versatility, and he can play anywhere on the defensive line in a variety of different schemes, something that defensive coordinators will love. Zerloin loved Odeyingbo's upside, but he also said that the team that drafts him would require patience. Not only does his technique need work, but he was also coming off a torn Achilles, which would definitely set him back early on in the NFL. As far as his strengths and weaknesses, Zerloin did mention his counter moves, his spin moves, how forceful his hands are, how much upper body strength he has, how quick he is with his traits, his stabs and swivels, and Zerloin added that his tape continued to improve. His weaknesses, he said he's inconsistent setting the edge, and his footwork was partially shoddy. He missed a bunch of tackles, and he has active hands, but he needs more focus, and his technique is still inconsistent at times. Zerloin would go on to compare him to Montez Sweat as an NFL comparison. Most scouts agreed that Dio had first-round talent. He fell to round 2 due to the fact that he was injured and he missed all of the offseason activities. He wasn't able to go to the Senior Bowl, the Combine, or have the Pro Day. With his torn Achilles, some teams might have actually taken him off their draft board. Odeyingbo did start his career off slowly with the Colts. His first season, he only played 173 total snaps, and he hit the quarterback just one time. But since then, he has gotten better every single year, playing more snaps and getting more QB hits every season. While his sack numbers fell off in 2024, his pressures, QB hits, and PFF grades were all career highs. So far, his career has panned out kind of like Zerloin predicted. He took a bit of time to get back to full health and develop in the NFL. But over the last 3 years, he has 96 pressures, and exactly like Zerloin said, he has been a nuisance for opposing quarterbacks. He recorded 6 sacks in 2022. He recorded 8 total sacks in 2023, although PFF credits him with 12, and then he had another 4 in 2024. But he's a guy who plays the run very well. He has a nonstop motor. His pass rush moves have gotten better, and when you consider he was top 10 in QB hits, the upside as a pass rusher is clearly there. So I wanted to go ahead and do some comparisons here, because a lot of people seemed upset that Chase Young only got $3 million a year more. Odeyingbo's draft comps were Montez Sweat and Chandler Jones, and his production matches that of Chase Young and many of the other free agent pass rushers. If you look at his production over the last 3 seasons, he actually has 3 more sacks than Chase Young does. He has more sacks than many of these free agent pass rushers that people have heard of. More than Bryce Huff, Azeez Ojulari, Joey Bosa, Von Miller, Malcolm Kuntz, or Marcus Davenport. The fact that this guy is just 25 years old and still developing, and he has more sacks than Joey Bosa or Von Miller over the last 3 years, And you have to give Ryan Poles credit for this signing. Just because most people in the media didn't know who Odengbo was a month ago doesn't mean he's not a good football player. He's been more productive than a lot of guys that you've actually heard of, and he was more productive than some of the guys who got paid more money than him as well. And his best football is still ahead of him. This is not a guy who's over the hill. He hasn't even reached his prime yet, and getting to work with Dennis Allen, he could have a career year this season. I also wanted to throw Montez Sweat in here as well, because Montez Sweat has more sacks than everyone I've listed as well. He has 25 over the last 3 years, and I expect 10 plus this year if he stays healthy. Too many people are down on Montez just because he didn't have a great season in 2024. But when you look at Dayo Odengbo's production, it's underrated and he hasn't even reached his ceiling yet. If I would have had my choice entering free agency, I probably would have signed Chase Young. But I trust that our general manager, Ryan Poles, knows more about football than I do. Odengbo is also a guy who's been voted team captain while at Vanderbilt. The bottom line with Dio is he is a good football player, only 25 years old, and he gives us position versatility on the defensive line. We could maybe even actually have one less defensive lineman active on game days due to the versatility that Dio brings. Even if he doesn't end up being a starter, he could still play 50 to 60% of the snaps and give us reps at both defensive end and inside at defensive tackle. His best football is still ahead of him, and I have one more final point about his contract and salary cap hit. The salary cap is going way up every year, so his cap really is not an overpay. But the Bears also have an out in this contract. Ryan Poles structured this where we can get out of it in 2026. So if Dio struggles this year, or if the Bears end up drafting multiple pass rushers in the draft, they could still move on from Odengbo next offseason and get out of this contract. So either way, you either have a young ascending pass rusher who could end up being a breakout player on the 2025 Chicago Bears, or you've at least added a versatile defensive lineman that doesn't stop you from drafting a defensive end in the first round this offseason. I initially was a little bit mixed on this signing, but I think Dayo Odeyingbo brings a lot to the Chicago Bears defensive line. He's a young ascending player who should only help the defensive line. So even though I'm not as high on this move as I am some of the other moves like Joe Tooney or Grady Jarrett, or even Drew Dahlman, that's just because those moves were absolute home runs by Ryan Poles. This is still a quality signing, and it's probably going to be one of the more underrated moves of the offseason. But even if this one doesn't work out, Ryan Poles again planned ahead, and we can get out of this next year in the worst case scenario. Let me know how you guys feel. I appreciate everyone who watches. Please remember to hit that like button for me. Stay tuned. I have a ton more content on the way. And until next time, bear down.